The first time my brother humiliated me in front of everyone, I was standing at the kitchen sink, drying my hands with a dish towel that smelled faintly like lemon. It was Thanksgiving. The whole family was there. Mom setting out mismatched plates, cousins laughing on the couch, that soft hum of old jazz playing from Dad's ancient speaker. Then out of nowhere, Danny raised his voice from across the room. "So you still playing pretend with stocks? Or did you finally get a real job?" His words sliced through the room like a bad chord. Forks paused midair. Someone coughed. I felt my ears burn as every pair of eyes turned toward me, waiting to see how I'd respond. I laughed, or tried to. "It's not pretend. I'm learning a lot, actually." Danny smirked, that same smug look he wore all through childhood when he beat me at board games and rubbed it in for hours. "Come on, Liv. You live in a one-bedroom above a laundromat. What are you gonna do? Invest your sock drawer?" They all laughed. Even Mom didn't say anything. I remember clenching that dish towel until my knuckles went white. I wanted to scream. I wanted to disappear. But instead, I just smiled and nodded, like always. They thought I was a joke. Looking back, I think that moment was the final straw that pushed me to make a silent promise. I never wanted to feel that powerless again. My brother had always teased me, but that day, something changed inside me. Before, his jabs had been about my clothes or my taste in music. This time, he targeted the one thing I was holding on to with all my heart: my dream of investing. I didn't grow up craving luxury or expensive cars. I just wanted to stand on my own feet and never have to beg anyone for help. It wasn't about getting rich. It was about making my own choices without waiting for approval. That night, after the dishes were put away and the guests left, I remember lying awake in the tiny bedroom above that laundromat, listening to the constant rumble of washers and dryers below me. My face felt hot with shame, but also with a growing sense of determination. If he wanted to laugh at me, fine. If everyone else wanted to roll their eyes at my so-called pretend with stocks, that was their choice. But I was done letting them define me. I would learn, grow, and figure this out. Alone if I had to. I threw myself into learning with a fierceness I had never felt before. It started with a dream, just a flicker in my mind that someday I could create safety for myself, a kind of safety that didn't vanish if someone decided to cut off support. So I studied. I read every blog post and watched every late-night YouTube video on market analysis, silently hoping no one would hear the commentary through the thin apartment walls. It was cold in that place, and I barely had enough money to turn the heat on. Instead, I'd bundle up in an old sweater with holes in the sleeves, sipping cheap instant coffee. Some nights, my eyes stung from exhaustion. Other nights, I could barely focus because of the headache that came from stress and hunger. But a part of me felt alive, like I was planting seeds in secret. Whenever my friends invited me out, I made excuses. I told them I was swamped with work. Truth was, I was broke, tired, and obsessed with making this investment path work. Despite the loneliness, I found a strange sense of purpose in those quiet hours, chasing a future I wasn't even sure existed. My family did more than doubt me. They shamed me. It wasn't just Danny throwing snide remarks. It was the way Mom pursed her lips in disapproval whenever someone mentioned my name. Dad would sigh and say, "She's just figuring things out." Like I was some wandering soul with no direction. My cousins, who once giggled with me about high school crushes, started avoiding me at gatherings. When we did talk, they asked me if I'd found something stable yet. As if my life were an unstable house made of flimsy cards, ready to collapse any moment. I remember one Sunday dinner at Mom's place. Danny passed around his phone, showing memes about broke traders. Everyone laughed. They didn't realize it cut me more deeply than any insult about my hair or clothes. I tried to defend myself, saying I was studying markets, saving every penny, taking it step by step. But they just blinked at me and changed the subject. It was like screaming in a soundproof room. My words vanished the moment they left my lips. I wanted their support, or at least their understanding. But all I got was mocking silence, or, worse yet, their polite dismissal. There was a night I came home from my day job, packing orders in a dusty warehouse, so exhausted I could barely hold up my phone to watch the market recaps. My shoulders ached from lifting boxes, and my fingers felt stiff as I typed in tickers, trying to keep track of my watch list. I remember wishing I had someone to believe in me, or at least someone to share the small progress I was making. But nobody asked, and I was too worn out to fight for their attention. In the faint glow of my laptop, the stocks flickered, and I felt a tiny spark of hope. Sometimes that spark died by morning, replaced by frustration and self-doubt. But more often, it stayed, guiding me forward. I started to realize that I didn't need everyone else to cheer for me. I just needed to hold on to that dream of independence. Whenever my brother's voice popped into my head, calling me foolish, I'd push it aside by envisioning a future where I didn't rely on him or anyone else. I might have been invisible to my family, but I was determined to prove to myself that this path meant something real. I spent years in the dark, figuratively and literally. My apartment's single window looked out onto a brick wall, and the fluorescent light in my kitchen buzzed so loud it felt like a wasp trapped in my skull. During those years, no one saw me staying up until sunrise, crunching numbers on a battered notepad. No one noticed when I finally started to piece together the concepts of support and resistance levels, or when I began to intuitively sense market shifts. My phone's alarm would jolt me awake at 6 a.m. for my warehouse job, and I'd shuffle through the day like a sleep-deprived ghost. Then, I'd come home, eat a cup of ramen if I was lucky, and dive right back into the world of earnings reports and price-to-earnings ratios. The only person who ever saw glimpses of this was the elderly woman who lived downstairs. She'd ask why my lights were on so late and if I was chasing ghosts or something. I'd laugh and tell her I was learning about the stock market. She'd nod politely, probably thinking I was a bit odd. But in her nod, I found more acceptance than I ever got from my own family. The truth is, I made a lot of mistakes. In my first year of investing, I lost a chunk of my small savings on a hot tip that went cold fast. I cried so hard that night, sitting in my drafty living room, shaking as I realized I'd have to skip paying some bills until my next warehouse paycheck. I felt stupid. I hated myself for being gullible, for thinking I could outsmart the market when I barely had a clue. But each failure taught me something. I learned how to manage risk, how to read between the lines of flashy headlines, how to keep my emotions in check when stock prices soared or plummeted. Slowly, I found a strategy that felt right. I'd focus on companies I believed in, ones I researched so deeply I could recite their mission statements in my sleep. Sometimes, I'd hold them for months or years, letting the steady growth outrun the short-term noise. My gains were small at first, just a few dollars here and there, but each one felt like a tiny victory. And with every step forward, I felt a little more certain that this was the path I was meant to walk, even if I was walking it alone. Over time, those small wins began to stack up. I had no one to celebrate with, so I'd treat myself to a slightly better brand of coffee or splurge on real takeout instead of cooking sad pasta in my tiny kitchen. Still, I kept quiet about it all. I didn't blast my successes on social media. I didn't mention them at Thanksgiving or Christmas. I'd catch Danny's smirk when he heard I was still playing around with stocks, but I wouldn't respond. I realized that arguing with him was like trying to empty the ocean with a spoon. He'd never stop mocking me, and I'd only exhaust myself trying to change his mind. So I let him think what he wanted. Let the family call me the dreamer who had her head in the clouds. I took comfort in watching my portfolio grow bit by bit, like a plant pushing roots deeper into the soil. While my friends bragged about new clothes and nights out, I quietly stacked up shares in companies I believed would thrive. I found peace in that. It was mine, untouched by anyone's laughter or disbelief. And that quiet progress felt more real than any validation they could ever give me. Then, there was the breakthrough, an almost magical shift that happened last year. I had invested in this small tech company that was working on security software. I'd read every article, listened to every interview with their CEO, and spent sleepless nights analyzing their competition. Something about them felt stable, like they had the right mix of drive and innovation to make it big. I bought in when their shares were so cheap, I was honestly scared they'd implode. But I held on, quietly, while the company grew under the radar. Then they announced they'd be going public on a bigger exchange. The day it happened, my modest holdings skyrocketed. Over time, through careful reinvestments in other solid companies, My entire portfolio swelled to a staggering $35 million, a number that felt surreal, but also deeply validating. I stared at my account balance and felt a strange calm wash over me. It wasn't just about the money, though, trust me, I appreciated the financial relief. It was about knowing I hadn't just gambled. I had done my homework. I had believed in something when everyone else thought I was wasting my time. And that day, I felt a sense of relief so pure it made me want to cry. I didn't change my life overnight. Even with that breakthrough, I stayed in my warehouse job a while longer, unsure if the success was just a lucky streak. I wanted more than a one-time win. I wanted sustainability. So I kept reinvesting my gains, spreading them into new opportunities I believed in, and letting the money grow slowly. All the while, I kept quiet at family gatherings. At Christmas, when Danny teased me for not bringing lavish gifts or flaunting new clothes, I bit my tongue. I was wearing the same coat from 2 winters ago, and he made a snarky remark about how I must still be broke. I just smiled and shrugged. Inside, I felt a little spark of pride, knowing my portfolio was growing in ways he couldn't imagine. But I refused to brag. I'd seen how quickly fortunes could turn, and I didn't want to jinx anything. Plus, a part of me felt that if I started talking about it, I'd be inviting him to weigh in, and I wasn't ready to hear more of his opinions. Silence felt safe. Silence felt like power. So, I watched, learned, and grew in my quiet corner of the world. That quiet corner expanded into a turning point in my life when I finally allowed myself to dream of something bigger than just surviving. I realized I could actually leave my job, so I did. I put in my notice, and nobody understood why. My supervisor gave me a confused look. "You're quitting? Did you find something better?" I simply said, "I'm moving on," and left it at that. When I stepped out of that warehouse for the last time, I felt a weight lift off my chest. For the first few weeks, I was scared, waking up each morning thinking, what have I done? But then I'd open my laptop and work on my portfolios, track new opportunities, and keep refining my strategy. I told myself that if I ever felt unsteady, I could find another job. But deep down, I sensed that chapter was done. This was my shot at building the life I wanted, without letting anyone else define my worth. No more ignoring my own dreams because someone at the dinner table might laugh. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was living on my own terms, stepping away from everyone else's expectations. Months passed, and one day, Danny found out about my success in the most random way. He called me on a Monday afternoon, which was odd because he never bothered to just check in. I almost ignored the call, but curiosity got the better of me. He sounded cautious, like he didn't know how to bring it up. Finally, he said, "Hey, so I heard you're doing okay now. Like, really okay. Is that true?" I let the question hang in the air for a moment. My first instinct was to snap back with something snarky. "Why do you care?" But I didn't. Maybe part of me wanted to see if he'd try to apologize or at least acknowledge how he'd treated me. So I just said, "Yeah, I'm okay." The silence stretched. I could almost picture him standing in his living room, fiddling with his phone, trying to figure out what to say next. Then he asked, "How'd you do it? I mean, are you still doing that stock stuff?" I answered simply, "I am." And I guess it worked out. There was a tension in his voice, a mix of disbelief and something close to respect. It was the first time I'd ever heard that tone from him. After that call, I sensed he was fishing for details. Part of me felt good, like I'd finally earned a small piece of the recognition I'd never gotten before. But another part felt wary. I'd spent so long building my life in private, free from their judgments. Letting Danny in felt like opening the door to all those past hurts. I didn't want to be reminded of the Thanksgiving humiliation or every snide comment he made when I was just getting started. So I kept the conversation brief. I didn't brag or rattle off numbers about my portfolio. Instead, I gave him broad strokes. I said I'd spent years studying and carefully picking my investments. I mentioned the company that went public, but I didn't share exactly how much I'd earned. I didn't see the point. When we hung up, I felt a mix of relief and dread. My family had never celebrated any of my small victories. Now that there was something undeniably real, I wondered if that would suddenly change. I wasn't sure if I was ready to let them back in. But at least I knew one thing for sure. I didn't need their applause anymore. It wasn't long after that call when I decided to buy a small house outside the city. It wasn't a mansion by any means, just a cozy place with hardwood floors, a sunny kitchen, and a backyard with a lemon tree that reminded me of those dish towels from years ago. I still drove my old Civic, and I still wore my thrift store sweaters, but the house felt like a sanctuary, a testament to all those nights I believed in myself when no one else did. I painted the walls soft colors, put up simple shelves, and filled them with books on investing and personal growth. It was the first time in my life that I had a space I could truly call my own. On warm afternoons, I'd sit on the small back porch and watch the sun filter through the leaves of the lemon tree. Sometimes I'd think about how much had changed, how far I'd come from that cramped apartment above the laundromat. And other times, I'd remind myself to stay humble, to keep learning, to not let success go to my head. Because this journey had never been about flashy triumph. It was about peace, freedom, and proving to myself that I could do it. Then came the visit. A few weeks after I moved in, Danny showed up unannounced, pulling into my short driveway in his SUV. He stepped out, looking around like he was stepping onto another planet. I greeted him at the door, unsure of how this reunion would play out. He walked through the living room, running his hand along the clean wooden surfaces, peeking into the small kitchen. The sunlight streamed in through those big windows, lighting up the space in a gentle glow. "Wow," he said, sounding almost impressed. "Didn't think you'd actually pull it off." I just nodded, offering him a seat at my small dining table. My stomach churned with a mix of nerves and pent-up frustration. We sat across from each other in awkward silence before he finally said, "So, how did you... I know you were doing stocks, but I never thought..." He trailed off, and for the first time, he actually looked uncertain. I explained in the simplest way that I'd spent years researching, investing carefully, and letting time do the rest. He stared at his hands, and then he mumbled, "You should have told us. Maybe we'd have taken you seriously." I smiled politely. "That was never the point," I said. As we talked, I noticed how different Danny seemed. Gone was the cocky grin, replaced by a sort of strained politeness. He confessed that his job was shaky and that the company he worked for was planning layoffs. He said he was worried about paying his mortgage if he lost his position. The old me would have jumped at the chance to say, "Oh, so now you need my help?" But I just sat there listening. For a moment, I saw him not as the brother who mocked me, but as a person scrambling to hold his life together. He asked if I could teach him how to invest. "Help me get started," he said, his voice halting. My heart pounded. I remembered all the times he belittled my dream. Part of me wanted to turn him away, to make him feel the sting of rejection I had felt for years. But I found myself taking a slow breath, thinking about how my journey was never about revenge. I told him I could guide him, but I wouldn't hand him money or give him shortcuts. "Discipline," I said quietly. "That's the only real secret." He looked disappointed, like he wanted something immediate and easy. But that was my offer. He left shortly after that, and as he walked out, I caught a glimpse of his old swagger returning. I think he expected me to say I'd give him a stack of cash or reveal a hot stock tip that would solve his problems overnight. But that wasn't me, and it never had been. I felt a surge of conflicting emotions: pity, pride, sadness, and a strange sense of closure. For so long, I'd carried the weight of his words, feeling like I had to prove myself worthy of his respect. But when he finally came seeking my help, I realized I didn't crave his approval the way I once did. I offered knowledge, not a handout. And if he chose to ignore it, that was his decision. In the following days, I half expected him to call or text, maybe ask a question or two, but all I got was silence. A part of me was relieved. I wasn't ready to teach him everything I'd learned because I wasn't convinced he understood the deeper reasons behind my journey. Another part of me felt a quiet sadness because despite everything, he was still my brother. But it was his move to make, not mine. In the weeks that followed, I found myself thinking about the real reasons I had poured my life into investing. It was never about proving Danny wrong. Sure, his mockery stung, and sometimes it fueled me to work harder. But at its core, this journey was about me stepping out of my own shadow. I wanted the freedom to choose my own path, to never again feel like I was begging for scraps or nodding along just to keep the peace. The money was a tool. It let me quit jobs that drained my spirit. It let me buy a cozy house. It let me breathe easier when unexpected bills arrived. But the real victory was internal. I felt whole in a way I never had before. When I woke up each morning, I didn't dread the day or worry about how I'd make it until payday. I found joy in small things. The way sunlight filled my kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee, the hush of the early market hours when I'd check my positions. This wasn't a flashy victory. It wasn't plastered on billboards or flaunted on social media. It was a quiet, personal triumph that no one could take away from me. Sometimes I thought about the younger version of me, the girl who used to stand at the sink, hands shaking, listening to her brother's jabs. I wanted to tell her, "You'll get through this. One day you'll be free." Because back then, I felt trapped by everyone's opinions. Their laughter seemed to echo in my mind, making me second-guess every step I took. Yet here I was, living proof that I could endure the doubts and keep going. I remembered nights in that cramped apartment when I questioned if I should quit. The markets were brutal, my bank account was shrinking, and my pride was bruised from the constant ridicule. But something deep inside told me to hang on. Maybe it was plain stubbornness. Maybe it was the glimpse of possibility I saw in those earnings reports. Either way, I pressed forward. And now the house, the sense of calm, and the knowledge that I didn't have to rely on anyone else, that was the sweetest payoff. I wasn't waiting for a medal or applause. Instead, I was building a life I could live on my own terms, one day at a time. And that was enough. The more I embraced my new normal, the less I worried about what my family thought. I still showed up to birthdays and holidays, but I no longer felt that old need to justify my choices or hide my achievements. I would bring a simple dish to share, sit quietly through the meal, and let their conversations and jokes pass by without stirring my emotions. Mom would ask, "So are you working now?" with that hint of disapproval. I'd just smile and say, "I'm doing okay," and leave it at that. Sometimes my cousins tried to pry about the house, but I stayed vague. I had learned the power of silence. It kept me out of pointless debates and protected what I had built. Now and then, Danny would make a half-hearted comment like, "Must be nice to have all that free time." I'd shrug, not taking the bait. The old me might have snapped back, bragging about my wins. But I'd grown enough to know that no explanation would change how he saw me. People believe what they want to believe until they decide to see things differently. So I let them believe whatever they wanted. My focus stayed on protecting my peace. Then, one day, I got a text from Danny. "Could really use your advice." I stared at those words for a long time. Part of me softened. After all, he was my brother. Another part of me felt the old hurt bubble up. I remembered the cruel jokes, the eye rolls, the times he made me feel like I was less than nothing. But I'd made a decision when he visited my house. If he truly wanted to learn, I'd guide him. So I replied, "Sure, what's on your mind?" We ended up talking on the phone for an hour. He told me how he was scared about losing his job. He admitted he'd been living beyond his means, trying to keep up appearances. He wanted a quick way to get returns, and asked for a guaranteed pick. I had to break it to him. There's no such thing as a guaranteed pick. It's always about calculated risk and patient growth. I offered to show him the books and websites that had helped me. He sounded disappointed, like he hoped I'd give him a magic ticket. Still, he thanked me, sounding more humble than usual. I told him, "If you're serious, I'm here." After we hung up, I felt strangely at peace. I never heard back from him about those books or sites. Days turned into weeks, and eventually I realized that maybe he just wasn't ready to do the real work. And I could live with that. I had learned that you can't force someone to change their mindset. They have to want it for themselves. I found myself feeling less resentment toward Danny and more acceptance. He was who he was, and I was who I was. There was no need to prove anything anymore. My life had taken on a quiet rhythm. Early mornings checking futures, afternoons tending to the lemon tree in my backyard, evenings browsing new opportunities or reading about global markets. I felt grounded. My house was slowly filling up with small signs of a comfortable life, a better couch, a decent set of knives for cooking, a few plants that thrived in the sunlight. None of it was showy. Most people would come in and think it was just a modest home, but each piece had been chosen with the freedom I'd earned, and that made it special. I didn't need my family's applause. I was living in a reality I had carved out with my own hands, and nothing felt more real than that. It struck me, in a moment of quiet reflection, that the final piece of my journey was letting go of anger. For a long time, I'd carried the weight of every insult, every instance of them laughing at me. But I realized that clinging to those memories only kept me tied to that girl who stood at the sink, dish towel in hand, feeling humiliated. I wanted to be more than that girl. I wanted to be someone who could look back on the past without bitterness. Sure, the family's teasing had lit a fire in me, but I was the one who kept fueling it, day after day. Now, I was ready to let it burn down to embers and cool off, to see Danny not as an enemy, but as a flawed human being who never bothered to understand me. To see my parents as well-meaning people locked in their own perspectives, and to see myself as a woman who rose above the noise, found her path, and walked it alone. This acceptance didn't mean I forgot. It just meant I wasn't going to let their opinions define my happiness anymore. My underdog story was mine to own, no matter who chose to acknowledge it. As these thoughts settled, I remembered the truth at the core of my journey. I didn't do this to prove Danny wrong. I did it to prove me right. I still drive my old Civic. I still wear clothes that are comfortable rather than trendy. But I sleep well at night. I eat without checking my bank balance in a panic. I don't hold my breath each time a new bill arrives. That sense of safety is priceless. When people ask why I'm not showing off fancy things, I just smile. I'm not chasing approval anymore. I'm chasing a deeper peace, a kind of wholeness that doesn't require a public audience. If Danny or anyone else ever wants to learn with genuine humility, I'll share what I know. But I won't beg for their respect, and I won't change who I am to fit their idea of success. Let them think I'm just okay. Let them wonder how I managed to make a living. I'm at peace with the life I've built, from the lemon tree in my backyard to the portfolio I've grown from scratch. In the end, the only person I had to prove anything to was myself. Let them laugh. Let them doubt you. Let them whisper. Just build in silence, until the day they show up with their hands out and their mouths shut. That's the lesson I've learned. I don't need my brother's praise, or my parents' sudden approval, or the world's applause. I've found fulfillment in the quiet spaces of my life, in the tiny house that's mine, in the mornings when I wake up without fear. Maybe you'll face people who call you foolish, who say your dreams are nothing but fantasies. Maybe you'll feel like screaming every time they mock you. But if you hold on to that spark, if you keep building brick by brick when no one is watching, one day you'll stand in your own home, breathing in the sunlight, and realize you've already won. You won the moment you refused to let their laughter break you. And the best part? You don't owe them a performance or an explanation. You can let them keep laughing while you keep growing, confident that when they finally see what you've built, you won't need to say a word. Your life will speak for itself. And that kind of proof is worth more than any applause.